I'm going to talk to you about a teacher's social and emotional competencies. And I'm going to tie it back to the concepts that we are learning in our equity training. Social emotional competence. Do you have it? Why should you care if you have it? Questions we will explore. What are social and emotional competencies? Why are they important? What effect does a teacher's degree of social emotional competencies have on student learning and achievement? So what are social emotional competencies? Why are they important? And why does it matter for a teacher? Did you know Illinois is one of the only states that has social emotional learning standards for students? That is the case. There are a lot of social and emotional curriculum and programs at the elementary schools and middle schools. SECSept PBIS, there are others. And Urbana High School does have PBIS. But mostly social and emotional learning standards are applied at the elementary level and at some middle schools. But it is something that Illinois teachers and administrators are just starting to incorporate more explicitly into what is being done at school. Did you know teachers must possess social emotional competencies to establish safe, productive classrooms and to be able to model and teach competencies to their students? That's what I'm going to share with you. You may be heard of Daniel Goldman. This video's graphic is a little bit blurry there. But Daniel Goldman, Emotional Intelligence, came out really big and heavy in the 90s. Goldman has continued his work. Some of it he called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. He also has a book, Social Intelligence. So a teacher's social and emotional competencies are similar to, they overlay on the concept of emotional intelligence. But as we learn more about individuals and neurobiological research, this idea of emotional intelligence has evolved to include social and emotional competencies. So some of the ideas: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, social skills, those were competencies in the emotional framework. And then the actual domains of emotional intelligence were self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And actually, these are divided into personal competence and social competence. And you're going to see actually these four are also used within social emotional competencies. So it just builds on the existing body of knowledge about social competencies and personal emotional competencies. What are the social emotional competencies? This diagram here you're looking at is a ecological model just showing how what is happening within the classroom is situated within the school, the home environment, the community, and that within the classroom, social emotional learning, which is SEL, the domains are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So responsible decision-making was not included in the initial emotional intelligence research. But these are the things that when you're using a social and emotional learning curriculum, you are teaching these behaviors and attributes to your students. You're helping them develop them more fully. But current research starts talking about teachers as having the need to have high levels of social emotional competencies. So I'm going to go through briefly what these mean. Self-awareness is the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values and how they influence behavior. The ability to accurately assess one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence, optimism, and a growth mindset. So if you have a high level of self-awareness, you're able to identify your emotions, you have accurate self-perceptions, you recognize your strengths, you have self-confidence and self-efficacy, the belief that you can get things done and do certain things. Social awareness, the ability to take the perspective of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. The The ability to understand social and ethical norms for behavior and to recognize family, school, and community resources and supports. So if you have a high degree of social awareness, you are able to take different perspectives, you use empathy, you appreciate diversity, and you have a high sense of respect for others. Self-management, the ability to successfully regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations, effectively managing stress, controlling impulses, and motivating oneself. The ability to set and work toward personal and academic goals. So if you have a high level of self-management, you have a high degree of impulse control, you're good at stress management, you have a high level of self-discipline, self-motivation, you set your goals, and you have organizational skills. A side note is it's interesting when I do research on social emotional competencies for teachers, some of the leading research right now is just talking about the relationship between high levels of social emotional competency and teacher burnout. So the research they're looking at right now is not so much trainings and or workshops to help teachers develop these to a higher degree, but it's more about if teachers possess this, then how do they successfully deal with teacher burnout and the stresses of teaching? Relationship skills. The ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. This includes communicating clearly, listening actively, cooperating, resisting inappropriate social pressure, negotiating conflict constructively, and seeking and offering help when needed. So if you have high relationship skills, you're strong with communication, social engagement, relationship building, and teamwork. These are part of what you do to a high degree and are part of what you understand is important when dealing with others. That relationship is essential. Responsible decision making. The ability to make constructive and respectful choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on consideration of ethical standards, safety concerns, social norms, the realistic evaluation of consequences of various actions, and the well-being of self and others. So with responsible decision making, if you have a high degree of this, you're able to identify problems, analyze solutions, you're able to solve problems, you're good at evaluating, you're strong with your reflection, and that ethical responsibility is really high. So why are social and emotional competencies so important for teachers to possess? Socially and emotionally competent teachers set the tone of the classroom by developing supportive and encouraging relationships with their students, designing lessons that build on students' strengths and abilities, establishing and implementing behavioral guidelines in ways that promote intrinsic motivation, coaching students through conflict situations, encouraging cooperation among students, and acting as a role model for respectful and appropriate communication and exhibitions of pro-social behavior. Wow. When you think about all those things, it makes me think sometimes that as teachers, we have to be superheroes. But it's really about developing these social and emotional competencies so that these behaviors become part of how we act and engage. They become automatic. How do the social emotional competencies connect with the Urbana Equity Training? You tell us. So this diagram here is an overlay where I have taken the 5 areas of social emotional competence. You see those in the background. And I overlaid them with concepts that we are learning in our equity training. Understanding race and equity, leading from the interrelational circle, using discourse 2 to challenge the status quo, looking for our implicit biases, understanding what racial illiteracy is, and if we have that as an issue, how do we go about building trust amongst different racial groups and have that kind of understanding? What is white privilege? And what is white fragility? And what is my ability, me personally as a white individual, to talk about issues of race and to engage in them openly and honestly? So these are the concepts that are being taught. If you go back from leading from the interrelational circle, you'll see that there were a lot of, there was information related to self-awareness, attitudes, beliefs, mindsets, behaviors, and your discourse. So these are concepts that have been a part of the training thus far. So what you're going to do is you're going to, in a table talk session, you're going to look at the concepts that we are learning about and utilizing in this racial equity training and map that back onto a teacher's social emotional competence or your social emotional competence. So in order for me to understand my implicit bias, which one of these competencies do I need to have and to what degree? Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is what you think. But the intent here is to make that connection between these social emotional competencies, which we very much can work on, that are very much a part of what we are doing as teachers, and it's just to what degree are we doing this? How well are we doing this? So these are very direct, explicit areas that we can work on. And there is research and literature discussing these different areas of social emotional competence. So what you're going to do is you're going to connect the dots. In a table talk discussion, you'll connect the dots between the key concepts in the district equity work and the different social and emotional competencies. For example, I gave you the example here already of implicit biases. So if you're talking about that on your table, explain the reasons specific social and emotional competencies are needed. So self-awareness. How does the competency of self-awareness connect to implicit biases? So I'm not going to give you the answer there, but so in order for me to understand what biases I have, what role does social awareness play? What role does self-awareness play? What role does self-management play? What role does responsible decision-making play? Going back to these areas of social emotional competence. Some of them may not apply, and some of them may. To do your connecting the dots table talk, you will also get this handout. The text part of the handout comes from an article by Jennings and Greenberg about pro-social classrooms. Pro-social behaviors are another term for these social emotional competencies. So if you hear about pro-social behaviors, they're the positive behaviors that individuals use to socially interact with each other. And so it goes through and gives you some excerpts from the article about teachers' social emotional competence, and then the different domains of self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, self-management, and relationship management. Also for you is included the graphic overview I created to give you the different concepts that have been discussed thus far in the training, and then the behind domains of social emotional competencies. So it says, again, in the table talk discussion, you'll connect the dots between the key concepts in the district equity training and the different social and emotional competencies. You may now get started.